All
All
right.
right, perfect. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the January 21st Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. My name is John Borofsky and I am the chair this evening. We will begin our agenda with a welcome. So welcome everybody. Zoom meeting and protocol ground rules. I don't have those in front of me.
There's not too much to go over. I think in the beginning it was like, how do you mute and things like that. But really, I think we like to see your faces and stay muted, please, if you're not speaking, and then raise your hand to get put in the queue and John will call on you.
Okay, any questions on that? All right, next is agenda review. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add or subtract from the agenda? That was easy. Next will be the approval of the 11/19/2020. Let's not say that year anymore, but 11/19 minutes. Is there anybody that would like to make a motion or discuss the minutes from November 19th?
This is Howard. I'll move approval.
I'll move second.
Any discussion? All right, seeing none, I will call for a vote. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Okay, opposed? And that looks like a unanimous approval. Next, we move on to public comment. Elena, is there anybody signed up for public comment?
No, we don't have any members of the public on.
Great.
You have a question about the minutes? You raised your hand.
I was absent, but I watched the meeting online on the YouTube. So I wasn't sure whether I should vote to approve. I could abstain, but I watched the presentations.
I think most people are abstaining if they're not here.
And I didn't call for abstention. So anybody abstaining? Okay, motion carries. Agenda item number 2 is called A New Year, and that kicks off to Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you, John. We just thought it would be nice to check in because we hadn't done a more sort of informal round hearing from everybody since I think our first virtual meeting back in May. And that was kind of a new beginning for us. And with this new beginning, we thought maybe we had enough time on this agenda to not forge directly into the work, but just say a few words on how folks are feeling about 2021, whether it's related to work or ETech or personally or whatnot. So I will kick it off and say that I am feeling cautiously optimistic. I'm not a naturally optimistic person. I have to work on it, but this has been a really good week. It kind of feels like New Year's 2.0. So I feel like it's been a very emotional year, maybe work-wise and personal-wise. And I think that, yeah, I'm feeling hopeful about this coming year and all that it holds. So I will, how about when we're done, just pick somebody in the room and I will tag Howard.
Okay, well, Happy New Year, everyone. And thanks to planning staff for the card. That was a nice, cheery thing. When Well, 2 weeks ago, I was pretty despaired, but I'm, as of this week, much more hopeful. And I think we'll turn a corner on COVID, and things will hopefully be a new normal, but hopefully we'll be able to start having some more face-to-face interaction. That's probably the hardest thing that I think we, at least our family has experienced. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this year. I think it's going to be a good year.
Howard, do you want to tag somebody? Or I can just call on Jennifer because she's sitting next to you on my screen.
Okay, that sounds good. Jennifer.
Thank you. So, like Rebecca, I am also cautiously optimistic, but unlike her, I tend to be overly optimistic and I have to work on being more realistic sometimes. I'm very hopeful in both of my jobs that the momentum that has built over the last year around, doing better continues, and that we don't fall into this lull of, well, things will get better, it'll be fine, and not just keep really pushing on important issues. And so that's my thing for 2021, is to just stay as engaged with things as I was before when I felt less optimistic.
Rebecca, do you just want to pick?
I'm supposed to tag someone.
Okay.
So I'll tag Ed.
Happy New Year, everyone. I'm leaving last year and entering this year just really feeling grateful. My wife and I both survived COVID in November and December, and we're back to work now and feeling very healthy, and just feeling very grateful. And hope I can continue to feel that way during 2021, and very blessed that my industry is continuing to work and putting a lot of meals on tables. Let's go with Heather.
Thank you. Glad to hear you're well, Ed. Yeah, I am trying to be optimistic. I feel like 2020 had obviously its own challenges, or maybe a better way to say is 2021 is going to have its own challenges. I'm definitely, I don't want to bring us down. I'm definitely, worried about the budget. We did get a COVID numbers update today, and it sounds like numbers in Lane County are a little bit better than they have been. And I feel like we haven't heard anyone say that with any sort of optimism for a while. So that was very positive. So yeah, I am just trying to keep the prize in front of me and try not to focus on things that are out of my control, and try to remain positive, and like Ed, try to be grateful, find those silver linings. So I feel like that's what I had to do in 2020, and that's just gonna have to continue in 2021. And you guys are gonna hear my dog barking, so that I am not grateful for. I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna pick Rick.
Well, I survived 2020 well. It actually worked out well for Chris and I. Lost a few vacations that we'd hoped to go and do some world traveling, that we stayed home. Had an interesting and fun time being a homeschool teacher to my grandchildren, which was interesting at best. Hope they get back to school soon. I'm happy where 2021's going. We have a change in administration, which I have high hopes for, given where we were. So, and because of my age, I probably get my COVID shots here within the next 3 to 4 weeks. So that'll be a good thing, and we'll move on. And I think we're going to have a great 2021. With that, Sue.
Okay. Well, I don't know how to be cautiously optimistic. I only know how to be optimistic, which is, maybe an equally burdening disease, but I am so relieved and so happy about the new trajectory in our federal administration. I'm relieved. I feel like I can breathe, and I'm very optimistic. When you have people who are smart and capable in charge, it makes such a huge difference to me. And so I'm very happy about all of that. On a personal level, I feel extremely grateful and lucky for having the abundance that I have in my family, my husband, and my health, and all of that. I have been aware every single day of the fact that I'm so lucky, and so much luckier than so many people in the world. So that drives my feeling of both gratitude and optimism, I think, every day. I'm really excited about growth monitoring, which I guess because it's been so long in coming, and I just think that we are poised to do some really wonderful things once the economy loosens up and we see some of the new policies implemented. I think there's some opportunity for our community to do some things that we haven't had an opportunity to do for a while. So yeah, I guess that about says it. Let's see, who hasn't gone yet? Mark, have you gone yet?
Yeah, no, I have not. Well, people around me, like my wife and others, say that they think optimism must be in my DNA, and so that means that I've never really felt very bummed, but I do recognize a sort of a new ecstasy, perhaps. I don't know where do you go from optimism, it's for all the same reasons that others have outlined. And so I'm feeling pretty good about the new year. And personally, I'm even though I'm not, well, let me put it differently. I'm not fully retired from the university, and this winter term is one of the terms where I had agreed to teach a course. So I'm teaching a course this winter term. And for me, as for most at the university, it's all by Zoom. But I teach a laboratory science, and this course involves a laboratory. So I'm finding it extra challenging to address that. And of course, that keeps me going day to day and week to week. How to morph the style of teaching, including the laboratory component, so that they can work entirely by remote methods. And so that being Zoom, not entirely. It's about 95% remote. So in any case, I'm having ongoing challenges with that, and I'm really looking forward to this new year and the new regime that we have at the federal level. Oh, Alexis.
Thanks. I'll just add on the optimism line. I am recklessly optimistic. I think we need to be recklessly optimistic to combat climate change, and I feel optimistic that our new administration might start taking that a little bit more seriously. I also am feeling pretty focused this year and determined around, so one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning. Thank you, planning staff, for the letter. You're the only city in the entire state that gave me a letter, which I hope says more about you than about me. but anyways, also, so with the implementation of House Bill 2001 happening over the next 6 months for the smaller cities, and that need to allow duplexes everywhere, and then larger cities by 2022, it's going to be a very busy next 18 months for me. It's 56 cities that I'm going to be trying to engage with, and I need to be focused and determined to get that done. So I'm trying to stay focused. Oh, and Lisa, we're doing intros. Welcome. And how have you been feeling in the last year, or about the next year?
About the next year. Oh, hello, Lisa Arkin, and I'm excited about the next year. I'm feeling hopeful.
Michelle, have you gone?
No, I'm here. I am videoless. Sorry, everyone, but you know what I look like. So I am looking forward to in 2021, no more natural disasters or economic hardships for people. I know that it has greatly influenced the work I do every day. So just kind of hoping for finding ways, I'll say, to show my gratitude for people and the environment by practicing patience, humility, and compassion, which is what I do every day. I communicate with the public all day, every day, and it really helps to slow down and be patient and understanding. And so that's my lens for the new year. And I'm leaving 2020 feeling thankful and just looking forward to getting into, my role in my job better and working with everyone around me who's been so supportive. So like I said before, patience and humility, that's what I'm taking into 2021. And I don't think Kevin's gone yet.
New Year to everybody. I'm feeling a huge sense of relief at the change of our administration. Kind of as a long distance hiker, I'm not sanguine about rapid change coming out of Washington. We still have large fraction of folks that just are going to dig their heels in like they did. It's probably going to be a tough road to hoe. We've got enormous challenges with the unhoused and housing affordability and job creation. So lots to do and a lot of actions that need to happen. I mean, last year for me was a real roller coaster. I think many of you know my wife is in the later stages in a very fine place. And she contracted COVID, as several of her housemates did, and almost came very, very close to not making it out. But she's a strong woman, and she's back up and around there in her own way. And I look forward to everybody getting vaccinated so I can go see her again. So let's see. Tia, you haven't tell us about your outlook.
So I am feeling hopeful about 2021 because 2020 set the bar so low. It's got to be better. That's my thought on it. And I will pass it to Elena.
I am working on self-care this year and trying to quash my anxieties about so many things that are unknown and trying to live in that space. So that's what I'm working on for this year, and we'll see how it goes. I think Phil still needs to go.
I think probably like almost all of you. I mean, I share the optimism that you guys have for the new year. I've got projects that I'm really hoping to kind of get launched. I guess the overwhelming feeling I've had lately is just exhaustion. I mean, 2 weeks ago, as happy as I was yesterday, 2 weeks ago, I was freaking out because the Capitol was being overrun. It has just been totally nuts. So I've been sad about a lot of things, all these people and the effects of the disease. I'm so happy that Ed and Kevin, your wife, have both been survivors of COVID. I'm so sad that John, your business went under. I'm sad that Alexis cut his hair, but you know, it'll grow back out. So I'm optimistic about that. So I'll leave it at that and say that I think better days are ahead. John, please.
Thanks. I would say for me, this year is transition. Is the code word for me. I'm transitioning in a lot of different areas. As you know, one of the restaurants that I'm involved with, we ended up closing. There was positive and negatives out of that. Obviously, 12 years of blood, sweat, and tears into a business, and then having to close it because of the circumstances was tough. But luckily, we were able to find somebody to come in, and they're going to keep most of my staff. So that was the silver lining out of that one. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to make that move at this time. And as far as other transitioning, you know, as you all know, I'm on quite a few different boards and commissions throughout the city and county and things like that. And I'm going to be doing some transitioning on those as well. I've been on the planning commission for coming up on 8 years. I'm going to be going away from that, but I'm going to stay on this committee, hopefully, if it's the will of the city manager. So getting out of planning, I've been elected to the Eugene Water and Electric Board as one of their commissioners. So I've been learning a lot about that, and that's very exciting to me. There's a lot of important things that are going to be happening on the eWeb front with water protection upriver. And just making sure everybody has their lights turned on and their water clean. So I'm very excited about learning about all of these things. Transition again, I'll just give you a quick anecdote. After we closed down La Perla and having Beppe and Johnny's just on limited to go things, there's less work for me to do. My wife made it known to me last week. I was home for 6 nights in a row. And she said that was the first time in 20 years that I have been home 6 nights in a row. So that's kind of a plus side to all of this. So transition is my thing. And have we gotten everybody? If you haven't talked, raise your hand. All right, there we go. We are done with New Year. Unless you have something else, Rebecca, that you want to bring up.
No, thank you everyone so much for your honesty and your words. And I think it's just a nice way to start the year together. So thanks. I'll hand it off to Heather for the next agenda item.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you, guys. We're always sorry when we have to, or we feel like it's the best use of your time to not hold a meeting like we did in December. We didn't hold one in December, but we miss you guys. We're glad to be able to send you a card. We wish we could do more for you. You guys are amazing. We just really appreciate all of your time, and yeah, you guys are very honest, and it's just great. You're a great group. So thank you for everything you do. Let's see. It looks like Jennifer Ye, is that who that was, is having some internet issues. Okay. And Kevin, I'll let you know too that you were cutting out a little bit. So I know you wouldn't know. So we'll just, if that happens again, we try not to use the chat, but I think that's probably a good use of using the chat to kind of let you know. So with that, segue into reappointment of members with 2-year terms. You might remember that we did this about a year ago for members that had 1-year terms. We did that staggering, and then hopefully folks want to continue with this riveting work. And so and that you would go on for another 4 years. That was the same as you saw on the agenda. We had the bylaws excerpt in there, so you would add on another 4 years. Those people are Lisa, Alexis, and Michelle, and I'm very happy to report that all 3 indicated they would like to continue. So just like we did last time, it's just a, it's just a reappointment. We just, yay, exactly. So thanks to everyone that's re-upped last time and this time. And I think we have one more time to do that. So thank you to everyone. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that Howard and John have been our chairs for 2 years, almost exactly. So about a year for each of them. We thought next meeting that we have, we'd like to go ahead and elect a new chair. And so if folks could start thinking about if they are willing to do that, that would be great. We can throw your hat in the ring at the next meeting, and then we'll do the election process then. But we wanted to give folks a little bit of time to think about that. So the other thing we'll think about too in that context is we're a little bit off, like we get a little bit off when we don't have a meeting. We could have done elections at the end of last year. We didn't have a meeting in December. So we do get a little bit off as far as officer times, length of time, and also thinking about how some of the other boards and commissions, I think, do them at the beginning of the fiscal year, so which would be in the summer. So we can talk a little bit more about that if folks feel like we need to, we're okay with staying with the calendar year, or folks would prefer to cycle with the other boards and commissions. So we can talk about that next time. Any questions? Seeing none. Is it okay, John, if I just move into growth? Okay, great. All right, folks. So with the beginning of the new year, I thought it might be a good time to just give you a really short check-in because we actually have looked at a lot of our growth monitoring work that we had forecasted for this group to look at. I know we haven't gotten to the punchline yet, and part of that is rerunning the buildable lands inventory, which is the methodologies for that we're looking at right now. But I thought it would be a good time to just walk through, remind everyone what we have already looked at and what is on the horizon for this year. So just do a little bit of a check-in. So I'm going to share my screen, and when I do that, I won't be able to see you. So Elena, let me know if anybody has questions. Okay, so, well, I can see part of you, some of you. So you might, oh, wow. Okay, I forgot to edit this graphic. I apologize for my bad editing skills in the upper left-hand corner. I was supposed to cover that graphic that's behind what has ETAC reviewed, but I didn't. So here we are. Welcome 2021. So just like I said, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you have already reviewed and what's coming down the pike. You might remember this graphic where we've got our different bins in blue here of different data sources that go into a data warehouse. All that data mixes together so that we can make charts out of these different data sources, and then eventually it goes into the report for the community and decision makers. So these green checks are all of the data sources you've already looked at charts for. Now, you may recall that we had identified about 300 charts that we wanted to put together. Not that we would put all of those out to the community at the same time, but that we would have some key charts and then a bunch of background charts to help us understand the data if needed. So given how many charts that is, we had to prioritize them. So While I've got green check marks on all of these types of data, these are the high priority charts. You've looked at the high priority charts for these types of data. There's some additional nice to have charts that will be coming later when we get to them, but I think this is a really good reminder that we've looked at jobs data, population data. We've got charts from RMLS. We've got charts that use our RLID, Regional Land Information Database, and building permit data from nearby cities. So that's exciting. What's on deck right now, and why we kind of shifted to looking at the methodologies for rerunning the buildable lands inventory is looking at our building permit data. So as you might recall, we have a building permit database that was not set up for collecting data. It was set up for processing building permits. And that's the same with land use applications. It's really about when did the building permit come in. There's not a lot of additional data in there, particularly around this idea of development sites, and that development usually happens on, there's a lot of times there's multiple buildings happening over the development site. It's not just one building permit that you want to look at to understand the density of the development, the parking of the development, how many buildable lands acres are actually being developed. It's a larger picture that our building permit system was not set up to capture. And so what's taking so long is a couple of things. One is setting up a new system, new software that will actually allow us to have that development site concept. We're really close, but we're still testing it, and we're still finding some things that need to be tweaked in that system. The good news is part of the reason we're finding some things that need to be tweaked in that software system is because we've already started backfilling data from building permits back to 2012 into our new system. And so we've actually already started reviewing that backfill data. Elena and Zoli, who's not here tonight, and myself and Thea, we've all been looking at building permits, documenting the number of units. Then we're starting to document the employment building square footage that's proposed, and then getting a good representation of the amount of land that's actually being developed when it's not the entire lot, if it's only part of a lot. So all of that gets documented into our new software system so that we can write those reports. So as you can imagine, it's just really complicated, and our technology staff is doing an awesome job. It's just really hard. And actually the work that we're doing to review the building permit data back to 2012 is great for the system, because in a way it's testing the system. And so we've found some things that need to be tweaked kind of regularly. We've found some things, and then every time you tweak the system, the software, you have to test it and make sure that you didn't break anything else. So it's a very iterative process that I've never been involved with before, and takes a long time. But at the same time, we are able to review some of that backlog data right now, which is good. So that's what's on tap next. Once we're kind of through the BLI methodology discussion, hopefully we'll be in a place that we can start bringing you building permit charts, including the spatial component, which is really tying the building permit data together with our adopted buildable lands inventory data. And then after that, we're looking at land use application data, how much of, for instance, how much of our vacant land has now been subdivided, that sort of thing. Have there been any land use applications that change the Metro Plan land designation of a property to something else? And how did that impact our buildable lands inventory? So that's coming, and it's gray because we haven't even scoped that out yet. We're not working on it yet. We have backfilled a bunch of data, but we haven't mocked up any charts yet. And then what feeds into helps us really put together our final report for you to look at is redoing our land model. So the land model is that complicated multi-sheet Excel workbook spreadsheet that you feed all of your data assumptions into and your buildable lands inventory information, and it tells you where you're at, what's the status of your land supply, and whether or not things have changed, or how things have changed, I should say. So that's kind of a final step before we get to our goal of the charts and reports. So rerunning this and the charts and report, or the final report, will work together. So I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of that. I believe I showed you this timeline before. So this may have been sometime next year, or excuse me, sometime last year that I showed this to you. I've updated it and I can go back, but you can basically see by me toggling that things like this is really what's happening right here, is the deployment of our software and reviewing the building permits are taking longer. And so I've had to basically just extend out the timeline. So we're right here, we're in January. Oh, did you say something, Elena?
Phil has his hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Oh, please go ahead and finish with this, and then I'll ask a question.
Okay, great. So we're here in January. We're working right now on the methodology for rerunning the buildable lands inventory. Once we have the new assumptions about density from building permits, number of units, all, and then the census data, we've already looked at that, employment population, all of those things get plugged into the land model, which I'm anticipating at this point will be sometime this summer. And so, let's see, just to go back, we were hoping to give council, have the ETAC review the report, have Planning Commission review the report, and I think the last time we talked, we were looking at spring for going to council with the report. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So at this point, I'm saying it's kind of to be determined, because we really need to get the software done and the building permits in place and the BLI rerun. And, there's quite a bit of work to kind of pull everything together. So I feel like I keep kind of moving the dial and telling you a new time. And at this point, I just want to say, once we get through building permits, then we'll have a better idea about when we'll actually have a report that you guys can get your hands on. So that was it. I just wanted to give you that update. I don't know, Phil, if I answered your question or if you had one.
Yeah, I guess it's just a question. Obviously, you are at this super pivotal. It's all reliant upon the work that you're doing right now to develop this model. If you don't capture all the data adequately, then, the results are going to be somewhat compromised, right? So I shudder to think of how the tedium that you guys must be going through to input all this data. If you could go back to the prior slide, I guess my question was, so like these land use applications, you've got people that apply for maybe some change of zoning or a land use designation or whatever, but then there's also things I'm sure you're having to capture too that are kind of adjudicated, somehow that, whatever. I guess the instance I'm thinking of is something along the lines of, and maybe this was already dealt with when Ed and Sue and Rick and others had worked on the prior work with the developing the BLI for the UGB expansion or UGB analysis. But say like the Rexius property that was in West Eugene off of Bailey Hill Road. And I know there was some real boundary issues about what the blob map for the UGB or the comp plan was, it didn't really pick up the level of resolution about where the neighborhood residential piece ended and where something else ended. It ended up all being residential. It's all been built, for apartments. But those are kind of things that, are you having to go back through and do things like that? I mean, it almost seems like it's really on this refined level of parcel specific for everything that is not just in a building permit, not just in a land use application, but implications. And I can imagine it's all sorts of things like that that are in Laurel Hill Valley and other places. So I could see the tedium and how it really stretches out that schedule. I don't know how you get to the stopping point, but I guess maybe that's just sort of the question is sort of, how can you sort of finally say we're done?
Yeah. Yes. And I saw Elena's eyebrows go up when you started talking about tedium, because Elena and Zoli have been just absolute troopers, because every time I'm like, let's not review that. We don't have time. We need to just focus. And then like a week later, I'll be like, okay, remember how I said we weren't going to review that? I feel like we need it, which is the worst. Just, I totally recognize that because then you're like reviewing the same 20 permits over and over again. Yeah. That some of that allocation happened when we did the UGB analysis. We necessarily had to make some rules. And, some of them we're talking about now with the BLI methodology. We necessarily had to make some rules that kind of went, this is high level planning. And some of that is playing out now. When we look at the building permit and we see we made some rules about where, not actually going in and figuring out where the plan designation line is, but just making some automated allocations of plan designation lines. And then you get to the building permit level where you're looking at a specific tax lot and you're like, well, that tax lot isn't really split designated, but we kind of had to, make some automated rules because there's no expectation and no possibility, no capability, no staff time to really allocate manually plan designations as an example by tax lot. So that is one of the things I would say that is challenging now that we're looking at development at a parcel level and trying to document it and then match it up to things like the BLI, which is much higher level and was done kind of like this. It does raise some challenges. And I have a list of caveats that I will be bringing to you all about the building permit review that we did because there are some situations like that where we had to make a call. It's not perfect. There may be ways that we can do it differently in the future. This is our first time doing it. We're basically reviewing building permits with, and using software that hasn't even been launched yet. So there's some challenges, but hopefully, like you said, people will understand that at a certain point you have to be like, look, we're trying to just get an understanding of what's going on. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be way better than either not having the data, which is where we were at before, or having to do everything manually. Yeah. That I like to talk about the 80-20 rule. So doing 80%, and that's not really how we operate. So it is very hard to bring yourself to the 80%. But in some cases, we kind of have to because we know it's going to be imprecise anyway. So getting that extra 20% isn't going to really get you very far.
Well, thank you for that answer, and thanks for all the hard work that you guys are putting in on this.
Yeah. Other questions? Don't see anyone. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks for listening, as always. Great. And yeah, if any other questions come up, of course, you can just let me know. I'm happy to give you updates on anything.
Okay. Next up, we have the growth monitoring buildable lands inventory methodology. Thea and Heather.
I'm just going to turn it over to Thea.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? Great. Okay, so once again, we are discussing the supply of the buildable lands inventory and going through the methodology, this time focusing on those flags that we talked about last time that are going to mean that we need to do some additional manual review of certain lots. So first, we'll talk about how we are working to incorporate impervious features into the automated method for quantifying existing development on lots that are eligible for partially vacant status. Then we're going to go into talking about that flag to identify lots that need manual review, because we think that the automated method is overestimating the existing development. So this is where there are multiple buildings spread across a tax lot, and the automated method is overestimating that development for the particular lot. And then we're going to talk some about the threshold value for additional buildable land to discern between what's partially vacant and what's fully developed. And just as a reminder, we're about to get into some real tedious detail, and the concepts aren't technically difficult, but they are very detailed. So just an overview, a reminder of what partially vacant is within the land supply model. And first, we're going to review all tax lots that are classified as developed to determine whether there is additional buildable land. So a tax lot will be reclassified as partially vacant if it meets all of the following criteria. First, it has to meet all the criteria for developed, so it has some sort of building on the lot. The next is that the total area of the tax lot is greater than or equal to the partially vacant threshold size. So for the vast majority of lots, 1 acre is that threshold size. If it's greater than 1 acre, it could be eligible for partially vacant status. However, for medium density residential, that threshold value is 0.5 acres. And for industrial lots, that threshold value is 10 acres. And then the last criteria for something to be partially vacant is that there needs to be additional buildable land on the lot for additional development. So you might remember this example from last time when we were talking about, okay, we ran that automated method to quantify the existing development on a lot. And it's shown here outlined in yellow. And we gave some examples of what it looks like for different types of development. But one thing that we pointed out was these areas over here in red were parking lots that weren't being picked up within the automated method. And we knew that that was a drawback to it and that something needed to be done about it. Either all of those needed to be manually reviewed, or we needed to find a way to incorporate those into the automated method. So what we did was we found a layer of impervious areas. So they're shown here, this semi-transparent greenish gray color. And these represent parking lots, some private roads, some other types of impervious features in multifamily developments. But as you can see, they don't cover everything, even in this just one example from the city. So you can see here, this is Costco. The parking lot is really well covered. But over here in these single family areas, there's no impervious surfaces drawn. Over here in these apartment buildings, the streets are drawn. Over here in this example, off to the bottom right, this parking lot is drawn only on half of the lot and not on the other half. So incorporating these impervious areas gets us closer to more accurately estimating the existing development, but we do recognize that it's not perfect and it won't be available for all areas across the city. But really, we don't, it not being in single family residential areas is not normally going to affect the automated method, because most of those lots are less than an acre to begin with, and so they wouldn't be eligible for partially vacant status. So we do think that incorporating these will get us a lot closer and will help cut down on those lots that need to be manually reviewed. Here is a specific example from Costco. On the left is the automated method that didn't incorporate the impervious areas. So you can see the existing development outlined in yellow, and it accounts for 5.61 acres. So it's basically just the building footprint of Costco along with the building footprint from the gas station. On the right is the automated method where we did incorporate the impervious areas, which are the parking lots. And you'll see that the yellow area, which we're estimating to be the existing development, grows significantly to cover almost the entire tax lot. And it covers 9.09 acres. So that's an example where incorporating the impervious areas is getting us a lot closer to the actual built area or existing development on that lot. Now we're going to move on to the flag. So we are aware that the automated method may overestimate existing development if buildings are spread across a lot, and those lots need to be identified so that they can be manually reviewed. And what we're proposing to do that is we're saying that if a lot, if the built area on a lot, so the building footprints and the impervious surfaces, makes up 20% or less of the total area calculated for existing development, and that existing development is greater than the standard deduction that we would be taking, if it meets both of those criteria, then we will manually review the lot, because we think it's likely that we are overestimating the existing development. And that's a lot to take in, a lot of caveats. And as a reminder, that standard deduction is the minimum deduction. So if we're saying the existing development is less than that standard deduction, we already know we're going to round up to it. So we don't need to manually review it, because it's the bottom minimum that we're going to round up to. So it's only if we're already above that bottom and we think we're overestimating the existing development, are we going to take a further look at it and see what's going on, and do we need to make any adjustments? So that ratio of the built area to the calculated existing development is mapped out or is charted out in the graphic below. And it shows it for all lots that are eligible for partially vacant status, which is roughly 2,000 lots. And that purple line represents the median ratio value, which is 0.42. So we are proposing that we look at all lots that are below that are equal to or less than the ratio of 0.2. And that would be about 200 lots to manually review. And I know that that ratio may seem very low, but we're going to dig into some examples coming up here, and we're going to look at what it actually looks like, what different ratio values look like. And we can, to give you a better idea, and then you'll be able to vote at the end on whether you think it's something that we should move forward with. So here are some examples that have low ratios. So you'll see the example in the middle has a ratio of 0.24, and that's above the threshold value of 0.2, meaning that the automated method is not overestimating the existing development. And you can see that the automated method is showing this yellow area here, as the built development for that, or the existing development for that lot that was auto-calculated. And it looks, eyeballing it, it looks about right. That's capturing all of the existing development on that lot. However, the example on the left and the example on the right, those ratios are below the threshold value of 0.2, meaning that the automated method is likely overestimating the existing development on those lots, and that we need to take a second look at what we're calculating as existing development. And you can see that in both of those cases, the lots are spread pretty widely across the lot. Or sorry, the buildings are spread pretty widely across the lot. And so we would take a second look at those and reevaluate and probably recalculate and make the existing development lower.
John, did you want to jump
Here
in
are some
with your question, or did you want to hold off?
Yeah, I just have a question about the impervious surfaces slide.
Sure.
So what you're saying is that if we're looking at the Costco parking lot, let's say, right? You're saying that that's fully developed, so you're not going to count that as developable. Is that what you're saying with this?
Yes, that is precisely what we're saying. That's a great way to put it. So
Okay.
we're trying to talk about what is already developed, and so what wouldn't still be available for a future development. So in the Costco example, we would say that lot is fully developed and it should not be listed as partially vacant.
So that's where, I mean, I like your idea of using that to get, using automation to get where you're at. However, in the real world, parking lots are often used as land banks. It's a parking lot until the value of that land becomes more valuable to develop than to leave as surface parking. And I think that that's going to become more evident as surface parking becomes less valuable. We've seen it just in the pandemic. Look at what the parking fund has happened to the parking fund and the parking availability downtown. Pre-pandemic, there was no parking availability downtown. Now there's an excess of parking availability downtown. So I'm just a little bit concerned. I mean, obviously with a thing like, let's say Costco, where the parking lot is being fully utilized, that's one thing. But if we were to go over, let's say over to Valley River Center, to some of these areas like the malls that have huge amounts of parking lots, and to say that that's not a developable site gives me a little bit of pause.
So I'm gonna jump in if that's all right. So that is how we did the original BLI. If there was over $1,000 worth of improvement value on a lot, which could just be a parking lot, like no building, we considered that developed. Through monitoring, and what Elena and Zoli and I are doing right now is saying, okay, we made some assumptions about how much redevelopment would happen. So redevelopment would be new development that is giving us either housing or jobs, more a building for housing or jobs. So not just parking over parking or parking over, it's about new capacity. How much actually happened? And that could be on parking lots, that could be demoing a building and building on top of it with a larger building. It could be an addition on a lot that we considered fully developed, like Costco. So it's not that we're saying it's not developable. Technically, anything in the UGB is developable. It's just that redevelopment is harder, and it's not really accurate to say that a parking lot qualifies as a vacant portion of a property. That's what we're trying to get at here, is what is our bin? What's our bin? We have our bin of vacant land. We have our bin of land that has development on it, but has a partially vacant portion of the property. And then we have all of our developed property. And we make assumptions about how much capacity each of those types of land have. Right now, we're just saying, how do we identify lots that have a vacant portion of it? And to me, when you look at the examples that Thea has up there, the one on the right, there is a vacant greenfield portion of the property. That to me is very partially vacant looking, right? Compared to Costco, which even if they weren't using their whole parking area, it actually has a use developed on it as a parking lot. So I just don't want you to think we're saying that redevelopment's not ever we're not assuming any redevelopment. That's not the case. It's just right now we're trying to figure out what lots go in our partially vacant category of land. So it's two different things.
And then Rick has his hand raised.
So Thea, could you go, I think it was one or two more slides forward. It was the area that you showed that I believe it'd be the Royal Node. Oh, you're going backwards. This one, yeah. So how are we dealing with properties? Is this in the Royal Node? Am I in the right place? Hello?
Yes, it's at Royal Avenue.
Okay. So out of curiosity, how are we dealing with things like the Royal Node where it's already, the whole land use requirements are predicated on a special area plan, in this situation, the Royal Node, as far as how we're counting this additional lands and so on. And the reason I ask is I think the long, thin one you've got sort of in the middle with white is one where it's supposed to be a parkland. I may be wrong on which one it is, but I think that one is actually in the Royal Node plan as parks. How are we making sure that we're not counting future designated private parks or public parks and so on, like at the Royal Node?
That's a really good question. And when we get to the capacity stage, the capacity is based on the characteristics of the lot, but also the plan designation of the lot. So if this was designated as parkland, we wouldn't be counting capacity on it because it would be committed for public use. Also, we reach out to different public entities in the area and make sure that we're not counting land capacity on any land that they own or are planning to use. We do check with them that maybe they own land that they plan to sell in the near future. And so in that case, we would not classify it as committed for public use. But we do bring in all of the committed lands and all of the lands that are protected. So maybe it's not park yet, or it's not owned by a park entity, but it has a riparian corridor in it, or it contains habitat, critical habitat for endangered or threatened species. So we still incorporate all of that into the model. It's just not being shown right now because we're just trying to hone in on the existing development, and we haven't actually run the model yet. We want to make sure that we get thumbs up from all of you on the methodology before we go ahead and take that next step to run the model.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit on me. Maybe it's my end. I guess this is one area that I would suggest that you're cautious on, because it's challenging the way the nodal development plan was put together. I don't believe it's going to be developed until we get rid of the royal node, but that's me. But I'm concerned because there are private properties that have some very odd use requirements under the royal node requirement, and it's a large tract of land that's large percentage of it's vacant land. I just don't want us to get carried away calling this usable when it's really got some major restrictions on it. So that, I guess that's my caution. Thank you.
I'm going to just jump in really quick. We did not look at refinement plans when we did the original BLI. We did use plan designations from the Metro Plan. So like Thea was saying, if this is actually parks and open space or natural resource designated or government and education, we're not going to assume any capacity on it. I would have to go back and look and see if they did that designation change at the same time that they adopted the refinement plan. I don't know.
Maybe we can do this outside this meeting sometime.
Yeah. I hesitate to say that we're going to look at all 22 of our refinement plans. And
I understand.
Okay. Good.
And then Sue, you have your hand up.
Well, I want to start by thanking Thea for the incredibly clear explanation of a really complicated concept. You used the fewest words to convey the most complicated concept that I've heard for a long time, and it was really, really good. And then also, I just want to put a reminder out there that one of the great things about growth monitoring is that we have multiple opportunities along the path as the future goes along to review these kinds of things. So I'm thinking about all of the properties that I could think of in commercial development right now where the parking is really underutilized and there's great potential, but we're restricted by zoning or use permits or whatever and can't really categorize it as usable or developable. But things change over time. And one of the good things about the growth monitoring program is that we will be able to make those adjustments over time as well.
Elena,
Okay,
are there
back
any
to
more
you, Thea.
questions? Okay. All right. And feel free to jump in with any more questions as we go along. Okay. Here's another example of a lower ratio. So all three of the lots shown here are equal to or below that threshold ratio of 0.2, meaning that the automated method may be overestimating the existing development. We will annually review that existing development for these three lots.
Which three?
Here's another example of some lower ratios. The northernmost example here has a ratio above that threshold value, so we would not manually review the lot. And as you can see, it is pretty tight. The buildings are pretty tight and close to each other, so it looks like it's doing a good job, the automated method. However, the bottom three examples are below that threshold, so we would manually review that existing development that the automated method estimated.
Ed's got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. A question for Heather, actually. I remember when we went through this originally and we were looking at the lots from an air view, specifically lot by lot, and we ran into a lot of estates in the South Hills that were on large lots, but we realized we have no development potential. I'm wondering, would this methodology have a possibility of changing that?
I mean, my guess is that a lot of those are going to have dispersed, kind of like that southern. And Thea, maybe maybe you've looked at some South Hills ones, but that southern one where you've got the buildings kind of spread out. I think that was some of the reason that, and topography, were some of the lots that we said weren't partially vacant. But I also remember some of the lots that we were like, wow, there's a really expensive home on there and it's a big lot. We don't think it's going to redevelop, or we don't think it's going to add partially vacant capacity, but we did count it because there was no reason not to. I mean, it had a big vacant area. We didn't use property value as a reason to not, or I guess improvement value as a reason to not count partially vacant capacity. I remember we had a lot of conversation about that, but I know that there was a lot of concern that some of the lots that we identified as having partially vacant capacity, while it technically met the concept, there was a feeling that given the improvement value of some of the lots that they would never, right, redevelop. But, we've actually seen some lots come in that, as property changes hands within the family, it does end up dividing, lots that we didn't think were going to. So, but yeah, I do think that this methodology, there's bound to be differences because it's introducing an automated function of identifying where the existing development is. But I think what Thea is showing is that we've also built in some other automated checks that mean we're still going to have to do manual review on the ones that aren't clearly, the development isn't very clearly grouped together. Does that answer your question, Ed?
He nodded yes.
And I can say from looking at examples in the South Hills, generally this automated method is fairly close to the deductions for existing development that were used in the last BLI. And part of that has to do with the fact that the standard existing development deduction, so the minimum value on sloped lots, is half an acre. So it's a pretty large minimum value to begin with. All right. So now we're getting into the medium ratio examples, and this is an example from the South Hills. So in this particular one, there are these two lots to the top right that are below that threshold value. So they would be manually reviewed. This lot is pretty tight in terms of the development. So that one might not, in that case, the manual review might just be saying the existing development deduction that the automated method generated is fine. However, all of these lots have ratio values over the threshold. And generally you can see that's because there's just one building. So in those cases, we would not manually review it. Here's a few other medium ratio examples. You can see how it does with some lots that are not just single family. So some multifamily lots, and then maybe some commercial lots over here to the right. And this is a good example of where the impervious surface layer did not capture the parking lots. So in those cases, these lots would need some additional manual review. But these other lots are all above the threshold ratio, so they would not be manually reviewed. We would take the existing development deduction that was estimated from the model. And then here's an example of some high ratios. So this is the old Shopco building, and you'll see all of these are quite high, nearing 100% of the lot, except for this one, which is 0, because it's an empty field. So none of these lots would receive manual review of the existing development. We would take what the automated method generated and go with it. All right, so now we'll move into talking about the threshold value for what's considered additional buildable land. So we've gone through the process of looking at everything eligible for partially vacant status and identified and quantified the existing development on those lots. And now the additional buildable land will be calculated in the same way as the 2012 to 2032 BLI. And that equation is additional buildable land equals the total tax lot acres minus the existing development minus the undeveloped land, or undevelopable land, sorry, which is protected and committed portions of the lot. So that will give us the additional buildable land. And if that additional buildable land is greater than the threshold value, the lot is classified as partially vacant. If it's less than the threshold value, it's classified as fully developed. So that threshold value varies depending upon the plan designation of the lot. For low density residential, we're saying it's 4,500 square feet. So you need that much additional buildable land to be classified as partially vacant. For commercial, that threshold value is 0.5 acres. And for industrial, we're saying we will manually review all industrial lots that classify as partially vacant as long as they have at least half an acre of buildable land. And this is because there's not a clear threshold value for industrial lots. And so we need to manually review those, and there aren't a lot of them. So we feel okay with doing that. And then for medium and high density residential lots, we're going to do also some further review and testing of thresholds and bring those back to you about how much land would be considered the threshold for additional buildable land to classify as partially vacant.
So I just wanted to add on there, in the last BLI, because the partially vacant analysis, like Ed was saying, and Rick, that we went through each lot manually. Sorry, Phil, and I see that you have your hand up. I just wanted to, because we went through each of them manually, we also used aerial photos and went, does that look like there's enough buildable land in the back of that lot to be a partially vacant lot still? We didn't have the thresholds that Thea is talking about that make it a little bit more clear that we're not talking about, if the lot has 1,000 square feet of buildable area in the back, all of a sudden we're going to count that sliver of land as partially vacant capacity. We thought it would be good to actually, since we're kind of automating a lot of this, to actually come up with a threshold of what seemed reasonable, a reasonable amount for a vacant portion of the property to still have capacity. So I just wanted to flag that for those of you that were on the first BLI review, and flag that for the rest of you that I think they said this, but that is a bit of a change, but seemed like a reasonable thing so that we're not reviewing, like I said, these lots that all, after all of that seem like they have partially vacant capacity, but then they only have a sliver left of vacant land. We don't want to review all of those. So just wanted to specify that.
Phil?
Yeah, I just wanted to, maybe we could kind of comb back through looking at these criteria, then the low density threshold, 4,500 square feet and so on. And if you could back up a couple of slides to kind of comb through those, just to make sure I'm understanding if you've already considered, say this one right here, the one with all the apartments over there by Chase Village. One more, there you go. So the areas that are 0.26 in the upper left-hand corner there, that's above that threshold. So it would or would not be considered partially vacant currently?
So that's a good question. We're talking about multiple thresholds, just because we like to make things as confusing as possible. So this ratio is above the threshold for the flag needing manual review of existing development. So it would not, we would go ahead and take the estimated deduction of existing development that the model gave us, which is this yellow rectangle. And then what we would do is calculate the total area of the tax lot, and we would subtract the area of this yellow rectangle because that's existing development. And then we would subtract any other undevelopable portions of the tax lot because they are either committed for public use or because they are protected for natural resources or cultural resources. So we haven't run that portion of the model yet, so we don't know if there are any, but let's say for simplicity's sake, there are no protected or committed portions of this lot. So we would take the total acres minus the existing development, and if it was above the threshold value for the size remaining of the buildable land, then we would classify it as partially vacant.
Okay.
If if there wasn't enough buildable land to meet that other threshold value, then we would say this lot is fully developed.
And in this particular case, unless I'm mistaken, I think this property has just recently been completed with a 5-story student housing complex, and all that development that's shown there has been removed. So whether it was shown as being partially vacant or not, a little bit immaterial at this point. And I don't know really how to, how we sort of account for that, how you account for it, because it's sort of the redevelopment infill that, kind of we hope to see. So I don't know how that, on this one particular instance, how that deals with your methodology. The other spaces that you have in here where you're showing the built area of the, in the center of 0.28, and obviously there's this big open space. Hey, that's the common area that was required when this big apartment complex was built. Nobody's going to build in the middle of it, I don't think, because I think you'd have to get some other exceptions from the code and and so forth to do that. So, I mean, that's the card laid, it's developed. The other one, maybe that's just emblematic of what you're talking about, where it would be shown as being partially vacant. And yeah, it was partially vacant. They just bladed everything over and built a big new mid-rise in its place. So, but that's all going to be captured with kind of this mechanical manipulation that you're going to do once you get this first sieve from the computer version, right?
Yes, and part of what you're talking about is something that we struggle with. So the buildable lands inventory is really a snapshot in time. So we have to choose a date where we're getting all of our data inputs and say it represents what happened on the ground as of that particular date and time. Because as you said, new development is happening all the time, infill, other types of demolitions. And so we are going to run it with an effective date of January 1st, 2021. And if the redevelopment of this particular lot was captured in our data sources as of that date, then we will incorporate it into the BLI. And if it was not, then we will capture that through growth monitoring. Heather, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, wow. I can't resist. Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, I've been having my camera off. I have been eating. Though I agree with you, Phil, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but multifamily is a unique beast because we do require open space, and we don't want to assume that that open space is going to develop. So a lot of multifamily, especially when the open space is in the middle like that, we just say that's developed. So I just wanted to alleviate that concern.
Okay, I saw. I think Rick had his hand up, and I also do. So Rick.
Yeah, just to be clear, on the one that Phil was talking about up in the upper left-hand corner of that 0.26 buildable area, let's say that site, I'm just trying to understand, let's say that the zoning requirement or the zoning allows 50 units per acre, and they built 58 units per acre, but instead of building 2-story walk-ups, they decide we're going to build high-rise, and it's 6 stories high with 50 units. And so they can't really add it. How, I'm not sure I understood how you're dealing with that, or did I understand you haven't figured that out yet and that's to come?
So I'm having a little bit of a trouble understanding. Are you saying if we were to say that lot was partially vacant and how we would calculate capacity on it?
Well, let's say that it is fully built out, but based on looking at an aerial that you have the yellow rectangle, and you decide there's excess land there or partially vacant, but in fact, the reason that is occurring, if you're using aerials, is that they built a 5-story building instead of a 2-story building, and that's really all the capacity that site could handle. How are we, I guess maybe I'm not making myself clear, but the example that you have here at Chase Village, these are all, I think, 2-story buildings, and so they spread out a lot more. But if you have that same site and the number of units required or allowed is 50, and you build 50, but you build them in a high rise, how are you catching the fact that this is really not additional partially vacant land?
Yeah, no, I get you now. Right. So it looks like from the aerial, it looks like it has room for more housing, but it's gone up with the housing. So it actually can't exceed the density allowed in that zone. And that's where everyone's knowledge of what's built out there. There may be some other things that we can do to try to capture those things and flag those things, like maybe run a density analysis or something like that. But that is, when we ran the BLI the first time, there was definitely what I call local knowledge that came into play, where we had to look at a lot like that and have somebody go, oh, wait a minute, that's a 5-story building. If you look further into that, I bet it actually doesn't have room. It doesn't have capacity for more housing. And so we did a manual override of the BLI to change it to be developed. So we will still be able to do that. We will bring the BLI back to you, just like we did with urban reserves, after we get all of this methodology done, and we'll be able to use everybody's local knowledge. We'll also try to find some additional things like that ahead of time to flag where it might look through the aerial photo that it has more capacity, but it doesn't actually. So yeah, that's a great point. We're just not at that point yet.
And we are also capturing, we're bringing in a bunch of other data sources. So we have, in the tax lot, we have some attributes that tell us how many floors a building is. And also we have address points that we can bring in. So if a lot has, 100 address points within it, that would also help us to highlight those cases that would need some manual review.
I put myself in the queue. So I think I'm getting pretty clear on the partially vacant. I guess one of my questions is, going forward, once we find out what's partially vacant and we say, okay, we've got this many lots of 4,500 square feet or larger in low density residential, at what point does the new 2001 law say, okay, well, in the past, each one of those had capacity for one house, maybe an accessory dwelling unit. Now, each one of those by right is allowed to have a duplex, and a lot of them will maybe have triplexes, quadplexes, or cottage clusters. Where does that come into the equation that we're looking at as far as the amount of housing that is available?
So I'm going to jump in. The short answer, I think, is that we don't have to plug it into our BLI necessarily. I think that we can run the BLI with our new density assumptions that we're going to get from our monitoring report, with our new redevelopment assumptions, which we will get from our monitoring report, all of that updated data. And then what I think, and I don't think we need to figure this out right now, but what I think we will be able to do is that the law says you can assume an additional 3% of capacity an increase of 3% in capacity. So I think we will just be able to have a line item that says, here's the capacity of our BLI, here's our demand. Oh, and here's the capacity, the increased capacity amount with that 3%. So I think it'll just be a line item. But we will need to talk about House Bill 2001 down the road a bit.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you so much. This might be getting a bit into the weeds, but Thea, thank you for these great explanations, and Heather too. Could you go back to the slide that was River Road? I think it was one back. Yeah, there we go. So my question is, so in many of the, in these cases, especially the top three, the developable land is likely to be on the back end of the lot, close to the riverfront path there. So at what point is it decided that is or is not developable? Because you'd have to have some sort of a, what's it called, a flagpole lot? You'd need access to it, and the access at this, for some of these lots would be difficult. You'd have to, have an easement or something. Is any of that taken into account?
No. So we're really trying, we are in the weeds. I smiled when you said, maybe this is in the weeds. I'm like, we are in the weeds. But I think that there is a fine point of being in the weeds. When I think about getting into, oh, well, this lot's gonna need a flag lot and this one might need this, and I'm not sure about the frontage on this lot. We're starting to talk about what I call shadow platting, or what is called shadow platting, which is trying to map out how development's actually how would this lot divide? There's a couple things. One is we don't have the capacity to do that. I think sometimes smaller jurisdictions are able to do that. We can't do that at this scale. And also there are other things that come into play, like, eventually House Bill 2001, depending on what the zone is, it may not need a land division. It may just be able to add apartments in the back, or an ADU if it's low density residential. So we more just think about it from the context of, is there a vacant portion there, and then we apply an average density assumption to that vacant portion. We just don't have the capacity to get into that level of detail, and the state statutes don't require you to do that either. But it might mean that in some cases it would be more challenging to develop a lot, and in other cases we're under assuming the capacity.
Oh, okay. So you're assuming that will balance out, because
it's an average. Yeah, it's an average.
It'd be an overestimate. My second question, again, maybe it's too much in the weeds, but you know how on some commercial parking lots, an additional building is allowed? Like you might have what is it out there? Home Depot, and then they build a Pizza Hut, within the parking lot. And I'm just wondering, in terms of buildable residential land, there's any thought to like carve off pieces of huge parking lots that aren't being used much, or up to their capacity, and rezoning it for residential? Or is I just thinking way out of the box there?
So when we did the buildable lands inventory before, we made some assumptions about redevelopment, which we defined as kind of like I was talking about earlier. It could be new development on a parking lot. It could be replacing a building with a larger building. It could be adding on to a building like Valley River Center, where it's all developed around it with buildings and parking lots. So redevelopment's kind of its own bin. And at the time, we did some economic analysis, pretty complicated stuff with some folks on this group, some people in the chamber, developers, etc., trying to figure out what the reality is of redeveloping land that already has development on it and doesn't have a partially vacant portion of property on there. And what we found was that it doesn't pencil out. At the time, it didn't pencil out in most of Eugene unless there were some sort of development incentives that came with that. So we sometimes like to say, just because you zone it as such doesn't mean it's going to happen. So there are, even if we upzone some area like a parking lot that was, it doesn't mean that it's going to redevelop. A lot of times a parking lot is lucrative enough. So through the growth monitoring report, that is part of what we're documenting, is how much development has happened since we ran the BLI on developed land. And so we'll be able to bring you those numbers of actual redevelopment that's happened, instead of looking at market conditions of what it seemed, those market conditions were kind of well, based on these market conditions, we don't think there's going to be a ton of redevelopment. Now we're going to have actual numbers to tell us what we've seen. That was something we didn't have before. So the next step would be, which I think a lot of you all are very interested in, is efficiency measures. How to encourage redevelopment. So MUPD, the multiple unit tax exemption program, is one way we're encouraging redevelopment downtown. It's a way to get more redevelopment than our financial analysis said we would otherwise see. Rezoning is another example. Changing the zoning code is another example. Those are all policy decisions or efficiency measures that we talk about when we actually, that we look at when we actually get into UGB analysis. It's not part of growth monitoring. Not coming up with new efficiency measures is not what we're doing right now, but that will be like a later step.
Okay, thank you. I do have Ed in the queue. We also are, I'm doing a time check. We're at 7:15. It might be a good thing just to go through after Ed's question and just do a check with everybody across the board as to how they're feeling about the methodology. So Ed, take it away.
Thank you, John. Just a short statement. I wanted to refer back to HB 2001 and the 3% that Heather was referring to. The maximum's 3%. It can be less than that, and that's a discussion I'm sure we'll have in the future. Thanks.
Okay, Thea, are you done sharing slides at this point?
Yes, I will stop sharing.
So I think it would be appropriate at this point just to go around to everybody and see what their thoughts are. I know that staff is looking for a straw poll as to whether we support the methodology that was presented to us here tonight. So I'm just going to call on people. We'll start with you, Kevin, because you're next to me on the slide.
Yeah, I'm impressed with the amount of detail that staff is able to get built into this model. I think we all need to recognize there are, brackets to the accuracy of the information. On that last slide, the southernmost parcel had this big building off toward the river. Well, I think it's a pole barn storing lumber. It's like, that's not a permanent highest and best use kind of structure. But the model assumes it's part of the development. We just kind of need to accept those kind of idiosyncratic things. Averaged over all the parcels that are being evaluated, I think this model is going to be exceptionally useful. So I'm thumbs up.
Okay, next I have Mark.
Well, yes, my thought was very much like Kevin's, the one he just expressed, and that is that there is a sufficient amount of detail and careful thought that's gone into the thresholds to assure that the automated method is going to provide a very sound estimate, and that most of the details, it appears to me anyway, are ones that are just that, and that we're well within the range that is of accuracy that's appropriate to the task. So I'm very supportive.
Great. Sue, you're next, followed by.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of the methodology. I feel like staff has looked at pretty much every iteration that could possibly happen and made rational decisions about how to deal with them. So I'm thumbs up for sure. Great work, really excellent work.
Okay, and then Howard.
Yeah, I concur with what Kevin and Mark said. I think it's an excellent tool, and it's I think a good model to use. And like a lot of models, there'll need to be some more fine tuning, and I'm sure there'll be some more detailed checking to ground truth some of this stuff as as necessary. But I think it's a great effort, and I'm very supportive of what the staff has done on this.
Great. Ed, then followed by Jennifer.
I'm supportive of the methodology and outstanding work, staff.
Jennifer, followed by Phil.
Thank you. I also think Kevin said it very well to start us off. And also, I just want to thank the staff for the excellent answers to the questions that we had. They were very understandable, and I really appreciate it. This is great work.
Okay, Phil, followed by Rick.
Yeah, I concur. I think there's such great rigor that you guys are doing, and you're using analytical tools to help minimize the amount of the real picayune infinite loop that you could do of just really disaggregating data. So I think y'all are doing an outstanding job. There's a lot of other things I think like Rick hit upon before, and when we were looking at that area around Garden Way, I mean that area had also been a node. There had been a special area study relating to it. Wasn't really built according to that plan. And there maybe is some infill development potential within there that you could still glean through this, and you'll determine that when you start picking over, some of those pieces in your further analysis. But great job! I really am impressed.
Great, Rick, followed by Lisa.
Yeah, I love the fact that we're using science and data to make decisions. I really like the way that this program's coming together. I would ask that instead of using sort of the safe harbor approach on whatever 2001 becomes, it would be nice if we could monitor what we actually get out of that, so we can figure out if we're getting 3% or 0.3% of growth out of it. So that would be the only thing that I would hope that we can add at some point in the future. I know you can't do it now because we don't know what that is yet. So I support everything. Thanks.
Great. Lisa, followed by Michelle.
Wow, well, everyone's so well spoken. I don't have a lot to add. I love that the way it's been presented. It's a way of ground truthing your data. So you have this double check system, and the methodology seems sound. I would approve.
Michelle, and then myself.
Thank you. I really appreciated when Thea went back and used some of the examples to really I got more information. So thank you, Phil, for that question, because I wasn't quite sure how to ask it. But then when Thea further explained it, I like those examples. So I appreciate using the tax lot to further explain it because it helped me understand it better. Yes, I do support it. So thank you.
Great. And I think I concur with everybody else along here in the committee. I think one thing that I would like to have going forward is, I mean, we can all pick out individual tax lots where something may not fall exactly into the methodology as we're looking forward. But I think overall, to get us a buildable lands inventory that is close, I think this methodology works very well. And I think as this moves on out of our committee onto the other committees that are going to be chewing this over and looking at it, the Planning Commission and the City Council, we need to make it clear from our sense that yes, you can pick out anything and there's always going to be exceptions, but that the methodology as a whole is sound. And if you try and take it down with just using anecdotal specific parcels, that can torpedo it. So we want to make sure that our recommendation acknowledges that there will be certain specific things that aren't going to fall exactly within the methodology, but overall, citywide, it gets us to a data point that is acceptable. Any other comments on this? So I'm going to round it back up to staff and see if you've gotten what you need from us at this point, and try and bring us to a close here in the last 7 or 8 minutes.
I think so. Thea, do you feel like we got what we needed to move forward? All right.
Okay, and then do you want to go on to next steps in our meetings coming up, February, March, and April, or just get that out as it comes?
Yeah, I mean, we do have our typical schedule laid out there. We don't anticipate, sometimes we think we're going to need that first Thursday. We're definitely not going to need it in February. And we'll just have to see how quickly this next round of analysis goes, because we're going to be looking at partially vacant lots. And I think it's going to take us a bit of time. And so February, I think, is kind of a maybe. But we do anticipate coming back in March and April for sure. Well, I am not saying for sure about anything anymore. But I think that February is a maybe, and I feel really good about March. And Thea, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on to that.
No, I agree with you.
And then Rebecca, what about urban reserves? Do we have anything either before us or before council that we should be aware of?
We do not have we are far from a council date. But I'm happy to provide a brief update at the next meeting if you want. We're working on the adoption package. That's the short story. The findings, the appendix to the findings, the amendments, the IGAs. We have multiple work plans putting together for our adoption package, and we're trying to do that all expeditiously so we can move into the public hearing process. But we don't have a firm schedule yet when the public hearing process will begin. But maybe in the next meeting or the meeting after that, when we have more to report out on, I can come back and show you a outline of what we're doing and what our expectations are for when the public hearing process is going to begin, if folks are interested in that.
Great. Okay. Again, a reminder for you guys, please, somebody think about stepping up and taking over the chair position, because I would be happy to pass that off to somebody else. And other than that, Ed, did you have your hand up for a second?
I did want to ask Rebecca if I could find out the total number of acres in our urban reserves that are classified as wetlands. That's all.
Yes, Thea and I can work on getting that to you. No problem.
Okay, anybody else? Well, good meeting. Thank you to Heather, Thea, Rebecca, Elena for keeping us all on track here, and the rest of the committee for taking your Thursday night to spend it with us. With that, I will close the meeting.
Good job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Rob.
Have a good rest of your night.
Bye.